I used to think that when I married Mark, I married into a family. But I was wrong. I didn't marry a family. I married a storm named Qley. Qley was Mark's older sister, beautiful, confident, and never pleased with anyone who stood too close to her brother. On our wedding day, as I walked down the aisle in white, she leaned close and whispered, "Take good care of my brother, okay?" I always know when someone isn't good enough for him. I thought it was a blessing. It was, in fact, a warning. Everything Qley did came wrapped in a layer of kindness. She cooked for us, visited often, gave me tips on keeping my marriage happy. But behind every piece of advice was a quiet poison. Mark's always liked women who keep things neater, you know? If it were me, I wouldn't let the house get like this. I'm only being honest, don't take it the wrong way. I tried to stay polite. I told myself she'd soften with time. But when I got pregnant, Qley smiled and said something that made my blood turn cold. "That's wonderful. Finally, someone else you'll have to take care of, instead of keeping Mark all to yourself." I didn't know it then. But that smile was the start of a plan, one that could have taken both my husband and my baby away from me. If I hadn't found Qley's recipe book first. I met Mark on a rainy afternoon in Burlington. We both ducked into the same coffee shop to escape the downpour. He smiled. That kind of warm, gentle smile that makes you believe the world still has good people in it. We married 2 years later. Everything felt easy, natural. Like life had finally chosen to be kind. The first crack appeared when I met Qley. She was beautiful, striking even, with that effortless confidence of someone who'd never been told no. From the first moment, her eyes weren't curious. They were measuring. "So you're Rachel?" "Yes, nice to meet you." She said with a polite smile. "Interesting." Qley lived only a few blocks away. She came over every weekend saying, "Mark shouldn't have to miss home-cooked meals just because he's married now." At first, I didn't mind. She cooked, cleaned, laughed, everything looked genuine. But slowly, her fingerprints started appearing everywhere. The spices in the pantry were hers. The paintings on the wall were her gift. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets for efficiency. Even the laundry detergent was what Mark grew up with. Mark found it sweet. He thought she was just being helpful. But I could feel it, that subtle invasion that made me a guest in my own home. One night I asked Mark, "Don't you think Qley's getting a little too involved?" He laughed. "You're overthinking it, Rach. She's always been like that. She just wants to help." I wanted to believe him. But every time she brushed her hand over his shoulder or called him my Mark, I could feel a small part of me shrinking away. A wife who didn't belong in her own marriage. 3 months after the wedding, I found out I was pregnant. My hands trembled as I stared at the test, a mix of joy and fear that felt like static under my skin. Mark cried when I told him. Qley was the second person to know. He called her before I could stop him. She showed up the next morning with flowers and that perfect, gleaming smile. "Oh, Rachel, I'm so happy for you both. Mark's always loved kids. You know, when he was little, he told me that if he ever had a son, he'd name him Noah. I came up with that name, you know." Her words landed like tiny shards of glass. I smiled back, but inside something cracked. From that day, Qley came by even more often. She cooked, saying I needed to rest. But every meal she placed in front of me came with that same look. The look that said, "You'd be lost without me." She began advising me on everything. Prenatal vitamins, baby names, how to dress. She'd print articles, scribble notes, and always add, "Mark prefers this brand. Trust me, he hates when the house smells like lemon cleaner. Use lavender." That's what Mom did. Once she even suggested a name for our baby. "If it's a girl, you should use Grace. That's what I would have named mine." I laughed awkwardly, but it stayed with me. Because the way she said mine didn't sound hypothetical. Then, one afternoon, when Mark was away for a business trip, I opened the pantry and found everything replaced. The rice, the flour, the spices, all swapped for her preferred brands. It wasn't my kitchen anymore. I sat on the floor, clutching my stomach, and cried. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just losing space. I was losing identity. I called Mark's mother that night. She was quiet for a long time before saying, "Kayla's been through a lot since she lost her husband 2 years ago. She loves Mark. Sometimes love can turn possessive." I wanted to understand. But every time Qley walked through my door with that calm, knowing smile, I could feel her claiming something that wasn't hers. At 8 months pregnant, Qley suggested we host a family dinner before the baby arrived. Mark was thrilled. I hesitated, but agreed, partly out of guilt, partly out of exhaustion. She insisted on cooking Mark's favorite dish, family-style chicken stew. She came early, humming as she unpacked her ingredients. "You just rest, Rachel. I've made this for him since he was a kid." The smell filled the house, warm, comforting, nostalgic. For a moment, I let myself believe things might finally be peaceful. Then I saw it. A small jar with no label, fine gray powder that she sprinkled into the pot. "What's that?" I asked. "Oh, my secret spice," she said lightly. "It makes the flavor pop." I said nothing. We sat down to eat. Mark had 2 full bowls. I barely touched mine. An hour later, he grew pale. Then dizzy. Then he collapsed. The next few minutes blurred. Me screaming, dialing 911, Qley frozen in shock. The doctor said Mark had suffered acute food poisoning, and if we'd arrived a few minutes later, he might not have made it. Qley showed up at the hospital that night. Eyes red, shaking. I swear, Rachel, I didn't know. I must have mixed up the spices, but I remembered the unmarked jar, the hidden shelf, the way her hands trembled when she'd stirred the pot. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen and found a small leather notebook tucked behind the spice rack. On the cover, written in neat cursive, Qley's recipes. Inside were pages of detailed notes. Every dish she'd ever cooked for Mark. The ingredients, his reactions, even how often he ate more or less when Rachel was present. And at the very end, a line scrawled in messy handwriting. "If I'm not around, Mark will forget who he is." I sat there, the house dark and silent around me, realizing that this wasn't jealousy anymore. It was a love so twisted it mistook control for care, and it had nearly cost me everything. I brought Qley's recipes to the hospital the next morning. She was sitting in the hallway outside Mark's room, pale, trembling, her hands clasped so tightly they'd turned white. I placed the book on the chair beside her. "Where did you find it?" she asked, voice raw. "In my kitchen," I said. "Your kitchen, apparently." She stared at the cover for a long moment, then whispered, "You shouldn't have read it." I opened it to the final page, the one written in red ink. "No one replaces me. No one takes him away again." I asked quietly, "What does that mean, Qley?" Her shoulders sank. For a long time, she didn't speak. When she finally did, her words came out broken, uneven, like pieces of glass being forced through her throat. "You don't know what it was like, Rachel. When Mark was 12, our mom overdosed. She was sick for months, pills, depression, all of it. I was supposed to be watching her that day. Mark was the one who found her." Her voice cracked. "He called 911. I froze. I just stood in the kitchen, listening. He never forgave me. He told me if I'd done anything, she might still be alive. I swore I'd never let him be left alone again. Never." She wiped her face, looking years older. "When you came along, I panicked. It wasn't jealousy, not at first. I just thought, if he forgot me, he'd forget her too. And then he'd forget why I stayed. I wanted to hate her. But watching her there, a grown woman still trapped in that 12-year-old's guilt, I only felt hollow." "I didn't mean to hurt him," she said, sobbing now. "I just added a little sedative, enough to make him tired. So he'd need me again. I didn't think he'd eat that much." I closed the notebook. It felt heavier than any book I'd ever held. Not because of the paper, but because of the weight of her broken love. A love that had blurred so far into obsession it had forgotten where care ended and control began. The police came the next morning. Qley didn't resist. They led her away in silence, handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent light. As she passed me, she whispered, "You won, Rachel. Now you can have him all to yourself." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in the ruins of someone else's storm. 3 days later, Mark woke up. His first words weren't about what happened. They were, "Where's Qley?" I hesitated. He turned to me, confused, then suspicious. "What did you do to her?" I let out a shaky laugh. "What I did?" "Mark, I saved your life." He didn't answer. Just looked down at his hands, still marked from the IVs, and then whispered, "She wouldn't hurt me." That was when I realized some bonds don't break. No matter how poisoned they become, Qley was charged with reckless endangerment. But her medical history, the trauma, the medication, the psychiatric evaluations, spared her from prison. Instead, she was sent to a long-term treatment facility. I didn't visit. But some nights, I dreamed of her, standing in our kitchen, stirring a pot, smiling softly. I just wanted him to eat well. And in the dream, I could never tell whether I felt comfort or fear. A year later, I gave birth to our son. Mark named him Noah, the same name Qley once mentioned. I didn't argue. Maybe part of me wanted her remembered, even if through tragedy. We moved to a smaller town, far from Burlington. Life grew quieter. Mark worked less. We talked more, though sometimes when he fell silent, I could see the grief still living behind his eyes. One afternoon, while cleaning the kitchen, I found a small envelope tucked inside our recipe box. No return address. No name. Inside was a folded piece of paper, written in Qley's shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry. I know things went too far. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Please tell Mark I never wanted him dead. I just wanted him to remember that once, there was someone who never left. Not even when she should have." I folded the letter and placed it back into the box. Then I cooked dinner. Chicken stew, the way Qley used to make it. Only this time, I changed the recipe. No secret spice. No bitterness. Just warmth. Noah sat in his high chair, clapping and laughing. Mark smiled at me, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled back. A real one. Maybe happiness isn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it's about learning to cook the same meal with a different recipe, one that doesn't hurt anymore. I used to think Qley was insane. But now I understand. Some people love so fiercely they confuse pain for devotion. And when they can't heal, they infect everyone around them. I'm not angry anymore, just sad. Because sometimes love that never gets to heal becomes poison, and the first person it kills is the one who carries it,